Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild adventure, The Mansion of Duke Brago, designed by G.S. Brooks for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shouts to my platinum patrons Andrew, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick, Andy, Chris, Alberto, and Manuel, and gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, Numa, Marcos Dade, Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, AK, Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, Sam, Ross, Limpy Spuds, and Jerome. Thank you all very much for your support. I'm becoming increasingly interested in the horror genre. I was never a big fan growing up. I always had a very active imagination. I was always very creative, which means I could not handle horror at all. Just complete wussball, nightmares, the whole 9 yards. And as I get older, I become increasingly more receptive to the horror genre. I think there's a lot of good storytelling in there, especially in the last decade. I think horror has reached a really cool space where there's just a lot of good indie stuff happening in the horror genre, specifically talking about film. And me personally, as someone whose horror fears have now been replaced by paying the bills and worrying about my family's safety, that's the real horror stuff I have to worry about. What I've also become a fan of is horror adventures in RPGs, because they allow you to explore very classic storytelling tropes and devices, but in the context of you are a bunch of badasses or investigators or something that's more proactive than what we usually see in the horror genre, which is, of course, the classic hapless, horny teens who are just being slaughtered left and right. So I think it's a cool storytelling device. I think it can be really fun as one-shots as well, to tell just a creepy haunted house type story. And we've actually run multiple DM's Guild horror adventures. You can actually see them right on my channel. The Haunt and the Secrets of the Blind Palace, both really excellent horror adventures. So I've got, despite not being a big horror fan maybe in general, at least previously in my life, I've kind of starting to become one, and I am a fan of those adventures. The Mansion of Duke Brago is exactly one of those adventures. It is a horror haunted house style adventure, and I think it's pretty good. I dig it a lot. I think it plays on a lot of those same storytelling tropes and devices. It kind of reminds me in a lot of ways of The Shining. It's even got a hedge maze you have to explore. That part's really well done. It's not so much haunted as it is the classic an evil thing has happened here and we're investigating it. So almost kind of the maybe part of the sanitarium evil asylum kind of a thing. It does parts of that. It's got the hidden thing in the floorboards, as I mentioned, the hedge maze with the topiary, which is straight out of The Shining. It covers a lot of those classic checklists, but it also, I think, is a solid dungeon design, which is the important part. And I love the way that it's structured so that it is an open floor plan. That's not what I want to say. It's a non-linear adventure for the first probably 2/3, because you can explore the grounds, you can explore the first floor of the mansion, you can explore the entire hedge maze, and you can explore the second level of the mansion. And there's a lot there. This is not a one-shot, by the way, unlike the others that I ran, which I ran as one-shots. This is definitely not, and it's not designed to be. The designer literally says this is probably going to be a 10-hour adventure, multi-session. It's a lot longer. I mean, it is a mansion. There's a lot to explore. But I love the way it's set up, that you have to collect these 4 gems, and of course there's some storytelling context for why you need them, in various areas of the room. Essentially, you need 4 keys to open the door to the final area, which is obviously very much a video game-ass thing to do, but it works because it presents this non-linear structure where you can explore different areas of the dungeon. Let your players take charge. They can have their own pacing and go room to room, explore the hedge maze first if they want, or save that for last, and kind of figure out what they need to do before you trigger going into the basement area, which then unlocks the final couple of confrontations. There are a few issues I have. One of them, there is no actual real introduction here. There's a very simple prologue. It doesn't really have any adventure hooks like a lot of adventures have. And I appreciate the fact that adventure hooks are often some of the most difficult things to do if you're not obviously running something at, level 1 or pretty low level. Because at some point, your players have their NPCs they're established with. They have their quest givers. They have their region. If you're really pulling stuff off the DM's Guild, once you're in a decent higher level, and this one is a tier 2 designed for levels 7 through 8, you can kind of assume that the DM has their own method to bring the party to an adventure. That being said, there probably should be some kind of adventure hooks in here that's more than just, hey, you mentioned there's a local, lord of an area who's gone missing and you need to deal with that. It would be nice if there were a few more adventure hooks, and then if those adventure hooks would then take place in the context of the dungeon. So if you were, sent to retrieve a certain object like some MacGuffin, or, from some NPC, like, hey, my person went to this person's sanitarium and never came back. Like, it would be nice if there were a little bit of hooks there, so there was at least some kind of quest other than, hey, your adventures, go explore this thing and go figure out what's wrong with it. So a bit of a misstep there. Otherwise, it's pretty well organized. We do get maps, as you can see here, and I'm going to give a big thumbs up and a little bit of a thumbs down to the map. So the big thumbs up is obviously we get full color maps. Yes, they look like they were entirely built in Roll20, which I don't have a problem with, frankly, because I know, first of all, I mention maps a lot in my reviews, and I never want to say I expect, DM's Guild authors to commission people like Mike Schley to produce these just gorgeous battle maps and include that, because that's going to jack up the cost, and that's not something I expect out of a product that costs as much as a sandwich. But I do like the extra effort that goes into creating a color battle map that actually has details and things on it for somebody like me who really prefers to run things on a virtual tabletop, or if you just like to, use those kind of handouts in your physical game. I think that goes a long way. So I really, really appreciate this. I think it's awesome. Even if it is purely like free assets built in Roll20, that's great. Like, do that. I think that works out pretty well. We definitely needed some like texture for the grass outside if we're actually going to use the grass, which we do because it's a hedge maze out here. I have a few problems, though. Problem number one is that these maps are not given as separate handouts that I can actually use as image files in something like Roll20. They are only embedded in very low res. In fact, we're just going to skip to the end so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. These are the kind of maps that we're getting, which is very low resolution, and they're embedded in the PDF. That's a no-go. So obviously, yes, I can sit here and print screen and try to work with it, but it's a very tiny image. It's not even like landscapes to fit a little better. So if you're going to do this, give me full big resolution as if I can actually use it for tokens and all that, because as of right now, I don't think I can actually properly use these maps because they're just so low resolution. The other problem I had is that they are annotated. I have to flip back to where I was. But the annotations are for their own little keys here at the bottom, but they're not actually, the annotations aren't used in the text, which is an important way to organize any dungeon for the DM, me, ostensibly, who is reading through this. Yeah, I can see the grand foyer, and then, number 1 here is the grand foyer, number 2 is the baths, number 3 is the game room, so this isn't even in order here, and they're not numbered over here. So that becomes a little confusing because I have to constantly flip back and forth and say, okay, so where was this at? And the fact that they don't have numbers means I have to then go to the key and then look up here and figure out where is that room. Like, yes, okay, I can kind of tell at a glance where the bathroom is, but seriously, it helps a lot having the actual proper number annotations here in terms of organizing purely for the DM. So there's a few organizational issues here and there, but the meat and structure. Oh, and the other kind of minor quibble I had is that while I like the dungeon design, it's physically too big. And this is an interesting thing that crops up when you do try to actually map what's in your head. Because obviously when you think of a mansion, you think it's pretty big. But when you actually put this on like graph paper or on, a virtual tabletop, these rooms are way too large. Like, you just have little tokens. I don't know if a token I believe in this room is like the size of one of these numbers. Like, that is humongous to where you get, and it becomes really bad when you get to the basement area. because there's just long, empty hallways of nothing. It just doesn't look good. So something to think about if you're designing your physical dungeons. Pay attention to your size comparison. Like, yes, you want to do a mansion, but when it comes down to it, you are creating a dungeon for players and tokens, and you want to make sure they're sized appropriately. Don't make it everything too small unless that's part of your dungeon design, but this goes the other way. This is way too large, even though in your head you're thinking, oh, this is going to be a giant ballroom or something, but it's just not that fun to explore that space if it's just that freaking large. Maybe that's my opinion, but I'm just staring at this going, man, this is a lot of these rooms are just really empty without anything going on. To me, if I walk into a giant room, I'm picturing a giant combat battle, like boss battle with a giant token. Like, otherwise, why do you have this giant empty room? So that's kind of a minor quibble, though, because, again, I don't want to discourage folks from putting together maps in free software and including that in your product, because I'm a huge thumbs up on that. Please do that. That's awesome. I'm so glad we got that, and I hate that I have all these little nitpicks, but I've got some little nitpicks about it. The actual dungeon design is very solid, though. The story behind it is there was a Duke Brago, Edric, I think, Brago, returned to his family's mansion, and of course it's got a great evil lurking, lurking beneath. It's just kind of, it's this realm of flesh that's kind of permeated this area, and there's this extraplanar entity called the Vivisector, and it kind of corrupts all the members of this household but it's kind of tied to the place, so it's kind of the classic, like, this place is haunted or tainted evil or whatever the TV trope term is for it. And the backstory is that the Duke basically was corrupted to evil, eventually even killed his own child and locked up his own wife, and everybody became dead or undead or ghostly, and then vivisected, which is to cut somebody up when they're still alive, all of his servants. So when you walk in, the servants are actually there, but they're all, and it's supposed to be kind of hidden, but they're all supposed to be scarred and essentially have the stats of flesh golems, which is pretty creepy and effective, I think. And you find this out through player handouts with the classic journal entries. Why do villains leave behind journals? Because it's good environmental storytelling, and that's the best way to get this across without having a giant info dump at the end, or having a character show up that can kind of explain everything. This one, it does lack social, if we're looking at the pillars of exploration, combat, and social encounters, I think the exploration is fantastic, and the combat is definitely there. There's a lot of combat. In fact, the hedge maze alone is just full of carnivorous plants and topiaries, so that's just one big combat encounter. But we're kind of lacking in the social pillar, but I'm not counting that as a big con, because I do feel like the player handouts that players can discover, which granted is kind of part of the exploration pillar, is an effective storytelling tool. And it's like the first BioShock game. It's games that are not normally RPGs that don't have dialogue or text trees and all that, but can tell really effective stories, which I think the original BioShock is a great example of that. Now, granted, we're playing an RPG where those tools are in place, where you can have social encounters, so I think the next best thing are having these really effective player handouts, and then you find them as you explore the dungeon. You find his eventual kind of fall into madness, although frankly it's a lot more subtle and well written than a lot of others, which is where the third line is all scratchy and the lines are crazy and he's just saying nothing, and it almost never even gets to that point. It's much more emotional and logical, and it's subtle to where the person themselves is just kind of more pursuing a science. It's all very well written, and I enjoyed it. I do wish there was at least one person the players could talk to, but there is a part where we finally get to the basement, and the actual Duke Brago has been reduced to a almost a vampire-like state, where sleeps in a coffin and just kind of continues on his work down there, vivisecting bodies. And he can basically go through all these trapdoors and attack the players as a pretty high-level warlock. But the cool thing is there's a note that you can actually snap him out of it. Basically, he's mechanically charmed and dominated personed by the Vivisector, who is the actual final boss of this adventure. So that would be a thing that I would really drive home to do, because otherwise the adventure is very lacking in social context at all. But if you can do something, and I would even go a bit further than the adventure does, which there's a part where you can, for example, you go to the second floor and you can find the wife who was locked away because, of course, he has inadvertently killed their son, and she's freaking out, and he thinks that she's gone mad, which, again, this is all through the journals, which is very well done, and locks her up in the sanitarium on the second floor in the West Wing, the creepy, and, of course, she's turned into a banshee, and there's, like, blood all over the doors and everything. It's all really creepy and well done. And you can find, like, the ring that's, like, inscribed, and it's got, like, this little lovely note from him to her, and I think like really clever players, for example, could like show him like that ring like in the middle of combat or something, and then I would rule as a DM. I would roll with that and really try and win him over so he could then talk to the players. I wish there were a bit more rules on that. I'm kind of skipping ahead, I realize, but I thought that was a really cool moment right here playing Brago, and this is mentioned in the sidebar a little bit, where if the players want to, they can basically try to convince him to, stand down, join their side, and he kind of realizes all the evils that he's done. So I think that's a cool twist, where instead of him being this horrible final boss creature the players have to fight, he's kind of a mid-boss towards the end that players could actually save if they were perceptive about it. So I would definitely roll with that. I wish there were a little more notes about that, but I think that'd be a fun tool. But as I mentioned before, the way it does the nonlinear storytelling is, and you find this out again through the journals, is you realize they needed 4 gems, and they had to kill somebody in different elements. So, for example, you find 1 gem in the body of a drowned person. You find another gem in the body of somebody that was burned in an oven. Fire gem, water gem. You find somebody in the second floor in a tower where like wind and lightning hit them, in a cage, and you find the 4th gem out in the hedge maze where they were buried in the ground. That's a cool way to promote players to explore areas, especially if you... The one thing I couldn't understand is where they actually find... There is a handout that specifically details the Duke saying, okay, I need to have these gems and power them and different elements and all that. I couldn't figure out where they actually find that note, but it might be that I just missed it somewhere. I even did Control F and tried to search for it, and I couldn't find it. Again, there's some organizational issues here and there, some missing details. But I thought, if you find that out pretty early or around the time the party finds the first gem, then they start realizing, okay, I guess we need to collect these gems, because they find a secret door where you can go down to the basement, but you need those 4 gems, the 4 keys, to make it down there. So you literally have to explore bare minimum those 4 different areas. And it's, of course, an effective way of putting them in all the different sides and corners of the dungeon. I think that's a really good dungeon design. I really like that idea of basically presenting the players with, hey, here's the mansion. You can go wherever you want. You can explore whatever areas you want to. But bare minimum, you need to go to A, B, C, and D to collect those things. Now, the players don't know where those areas are, but by telling them about the elements, they can maybe guess, okay, we need somewhere that has to do with air, somewhere that has to do with fire. It almost feels like, old school adventure gamey in that way. So I just think that's a really cool way of designing this entire dungeon. You find 2 of them, I believe, in the first floor, in the bathtub and in the kitchen. You find the 3rd one out in the hedge maze, and then the 4th one is on the second floor here at the end with the cage going up. And there's a pretty good mix of, combat encounters. There's a lot of ghouls. There's, of course, the flesh golems. There are some ghosts and banshees. There's a few traps around here, some statues that can fuck with you. Some in the trophy room, these like deer heads come to life and kind of knock into you, which is nice. And then there's also what I really was looking for, and I'm glad I found, which were just creepy things happening that don't actually have anything to do with damage or combat, which I think is a really nice way to break up the action but still keep the theme going. So, for example, in the master bedroom, you see a mirror image of the wife, and then she, of course, turns all ghastly, and the room fills with blood, and all this creepy shit happens, and you realize it's all an illusion. Shit like that is what's really important to making a horror adventure without literally dragging the players through the motion of going through a bunch of combat or various traps all the time and having, hey, you take this much psychic damage or something. Sometimes scary shit happens, and although it would be interesting now that I think about it, because horror can weigh on your mind, to maybe have people lose like hit dice, not necessarily exhaustion, because that can be very mechanically debilitating, but I think losing hit dice could be an interesting way of creating a save. But I also just like seeing scary shit happen without necessarily any consequences, just to drive home the theme that like scary shit happened here. There is one content warning of something particularly horrific, which of course has to do with child death, where you go to the child's bedroom and you find that the Duke has in fact killed his own child, even though he was like, and it's suitably creepy in his notes, especially if you find that after you find the dead kid, because to his notes he's just like, man, the child's being really unruly, I had to force his jaws open and pour this medicine down, and of course you find the child with just his fucking mouth wrenched open. There's a content warning there, as there should be. Probably that should also be placed at the beginning of the adventure, though. Just list all the different things. There's some gore, there's loss, and with horror especially, I think it's important that we understand what kind of horror we're dealing with, because the horror genre in general can encompass all kinds of things, from psychological torture to silly slasher stuff. So I think having specific content warnings at the beginning would be very nice. Instead, we get one that's kind of right before that actual room. It's like, hey, warning. Like, okay, maybe put that at the beginning. But I'm very positive on it. The final boss fight, you can see here where the basement, it looks really weird that it's so big. Like, it's just a whole lot of empty hallways. Is not terribly exciting. It's weird because there's a ritual that you can actually stop. I was a bit confused about how this part worked at the end, but you find the father of the, the original Duke Brago as just a zombie, and he kind of antagonizes the players in the ritual room, and you think he might be the main thing behind it, and then you kill him, but it turns out killing him is actually the final part of the ritual. So that's an interesting twist. You'd have to be very careful about pulling that off as a DM, though, because I think you need to make it more like this, who's just like the stat block of a zombie, which I would treat as not even combat. Basically, if the players attack him or something, then I would treat that as like, you just kill this guy, and it turns out that was the final step of the ritual, and then they're transported into this extra dimensional area where they have the final boss fight. The problem is, of course, it's a single boss without any minions. It's decently powerful for levels 7 to 8, but it has legendary actions and even one use of legendary resistance, but even then, solo bosses, kind of difficult to use. So probably should have structured that a bit differently, or given it some ghouls that it can use, or even just some minions, I think would have gone a long way. And I think having this ritual room be a little bit more explained, where because again, there's so few social encounters, so if you get a chance to actually talk to this figure, as it looks like you do, I would have preferred that this be more than just a simple like paragraph about, hey, he's intelligent and capable of speech, but he's controlled by the vivisector, and then when the players kill him, it opens up the portal. Like, that's a big deal. That's going to be a big scene for a DM to run. I need a little bit more explanation about that. So there's a little bit of details I think are missing in some areas, and other stuff is like, there's one of the rooms that just says like here, like a number of ghouls feast on what can be found in the pit. Well, how many ghouls exactly? Like, you need to tell me, like, are there 4? Are there 7? Is there 12? Like, how many enemies are there in this room? So a little bit of details here and there, the annotated stuff. That stuff could have been done a little bit better, but overall, I'm very positive on this adventure. The handouts are very cool, though they should have been separate player. Basically, this needed a zip folder in addition to the product, where it included separate player handouts as well as the actual maps in bigger resolution. But other than that, I'm very positive on this adventure, and I think it's an awesome addition to anybody who's a fan of these kind of haunted house style adventures, although this one is a lot bigger than the others that we have seen. All right, final thoughts on the Mansion of Duke Brago. Pros: non-linear haunted mansion dungeon design with hedge maze, which is cool. There need to be more hedge mazes with topiary animals coming to life. I think that's a very, very cool theme. Pros: effectively creepy theme that balances exploration, combat, and environmental storytelling. Usually I would give you a knock if you don't have any social encounters, but I think the environmental storytelling is done so well here that it can almost take the place of not having a lot of social encounters. But that being said, I would play up the social encounter with the father, and hopefully the players can turn him, or at least talk to him, and then I would definitely play up the social encounter with the, grandfather at the end, because it is kind of lacking in social encounters, and maybe a few more details about how the servants react, because they are just kind of flesh golems. They can just repeat their same phrase, and if you basically try to talk to them too much, they violently attack you. So it's just lacking a lot in that social department. So I think being able to expand the few ones that are there would have gone a long way. Pros: full color maps. See, I put that as a pro. Thumbs up. Cons: unfortunately, the other flip of the coin for the maps is that they are low resolution and they are embedded in the PDF. So we need it, if you're going to do these maps, which I like that map style, I'm fine with it. That's probably the exact kind of map I would build if I were running this adventure. That being said, I need to have it be an actual map image that I can drag, onto Roll20 and have it be proper resolution, everything scaled. And the other con is just, I kind of wrapped up all my complaints into one other con point, which is there are some organizational issues and some missing details, such as exact number of enemies in certain rooms or where to find certain notes. The annotated thing about being able to say this is room number 1, this is room number 2 in the actual text, things like that, which is a lot of nitpicky stuff here and there, but all of those combined definitely equals a point of con in my review. Final verdict. The Mansion of Duke Brago features a checklist of horror tropes within a solid narrative foundation and compelling dungeon design. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. You can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.